Good evening, everyone. I hope you're all doing well. I'm going to try something a little bit different this evening because I found a topic that I really have been wanting to talk about for quite a while, and there wasn't anything huge on my radar today. So I wanted to kind of discuss this with you guys. It's going to be a little bit more evergreen. You might be able to come back to this in the future if you want to find a source for some of this stuff. But I have long been concerned with what is happening to young men in today's society. You guys all know that I'm a big fan of Jordan Peterson, who was recently asked very roughly about whether he thinks it's a good thing that he's a role model to young men. And he ended up in tears because he was like, well, yeah, someone should be, right? It's a very big problem. I ran across this article from The Economist that we're going to look at together about why young men, boys, aren't doing well in school. So let's start with that, and then I have a few other points to make, and I'm going to end this video on a note of gratitude for guys in general and the job that they do in society. All right, it's going to be kind of annoying for me to have my arm here. My apologies. Andy keeps trying to get me to get a mouse, but we changed my camera angle, and I'm like, yeah, now I actually really need one. So let's look at this together. This is from The Economist. Why are boys doing badly at school? Peer pressure, poor schooling, and biology may all contribute. I am going to posit before we get into this article that I think probably the biggest part of the reason boys aren't doing well in school, in American state schools, is because they were designed for girls. That's just what I'm going to start off with, but we'll see what The Economist says for sure. Let's see here. Oh, we went all the way to the bottom. Awesome. Let's go back up here. I'm using an archived version because The Economist insists I remove my ad blocker, and I refuse. Around the world, girls are more likely than boys to get no education at all, but once they are in a classroom, boys usually do worse. The gulf is widest in reading. In almost all countries that collect sufficient data, girls are better readers than boys at 10 years old. Boys also lag in international science tests and have mostly given up a long-standing advantage in math. Globally, colleges and universities now enroll just 88 men for every 100 women. These trends have long been starkest in rich countries, but are increasingly visible in poor ones too, perhaps because the hurdles that long held schoolgirls back are gradually being knocked down. Why do boys do badly in school? I will not air my grievances with the way this person's writing, but I don't love it. There is little evidence that boys are doing worse than they used to. Rather, high attainment by female pupils in recent years is showing that much more could be expected of their male peers. Interesting. Some of the problem boys face are cultural. In workplaces around the world, men still, quote, enjoy vast unearned advantages over women, including better pay and greater likelihood of promotion. We're going to unpack that at the end of this video because this is the nonsense that gave rise to the pay gap BS. So we'll unpack that for sure. So just put a pin on that one. As a result, men are less likely than women to think that excelling in school is the only way to obtain the future they desire. Yes, because that is correct. You don't have to excel in school to get a lot of these really important social skills and these really important jobs that keep the world running. So let's continue. I always lose my place. Sorry, guys. Meanwhile, popular culture rarely presents studying as a manly pursuit. Parents do not help either. Surveys suggest that they spend less time reading with sons than they do with daughters. Interesting. So there's a bias against boys learning how to read in their own parents. I feel like we could look at that for sure. How schools are run matters too. Boys often lack studious role models there. Male teachers are in the minority in most rich countries. That's correct. Most teachers are females. So you're starting to see the problem here. A shortage of male teachers is a particular problem in places with lots of single-sex schools, such as the Middle East. Boys there are often taught by male migrants from poorer countries, who do not easily earn people's respect. Boys also report higher rates of bullying at school than girls and are more likely to say that it involves being punched or kicked. And they are more often beaten by teachers. In Zimbabwe and Singapore, for example, staff are forbidden from hitting girls, but are allowed by law to wallop boys. Fear of violence increases the risk that boys will skip school or give it up early. That's interesting. That's something that I did not know. Some observers think differences in the rates at which boys and girls develop in adolescence could contribute to the problem. In his book Of Boys and Men, Richard Reeves of the Brookings Institution, a think tank, cites research suggesting that parts of the brain associated with impulse control, forward thinking, and regulating emotions mature later in boys. I believe that to be the case. Not just anecdotally, this is my understanding of the science that I learned when I was taking anatomy and physiology. Mr. Reeves argues that boys would benefit from starting and ending their schooling a year later than girls so that they are better prepared to succeed in early secondary school. The costs of boys' struggles are huge. They are more likely to repeat years of school, which is expensive and often counterproductive because it increases the risk of pupils dropping out. Researchers in Australia estimate that the cohort of boys who ditch school early each year costs the country Australian $25.9 billion, which is 17.2 US dollars. Billion over the boys' lifetimes. For young women, it is $10 billion Australian. That is through both lost earnings and knock-on effects. For instance, boys who drop out of school are more likely to commit crimes. That is an interesting point too. Countries with lots of uneducated men are also more likely to breed gangs and suffer from unrest. A study of civil war in Sierra Leone in the 1990s found that boys and young men who have received no schooling were 9 times more likely to become combatants than those who had completed primary school. Many girls still face barriers to good schooling, especially in poor countries. Destitute parents will commonly pay for their sons to get lessons before their daughters, and girls are often required to leave school if they become pregnant or are forced into marriage. These evils are recognized by donors and are becoming priorities for governments, but concerted efforts to improve outcomes for boys are uncommon, even where their needs are dire. A recent report from UNESCO, a UN body, identified 19 countries where schoolboys are doing especially badly. Only 4 had come up with policies to turn things around. So my main bones to pick with this article, we read the whole thing, it's relatively short, are that the writing is terrible, first of all. Girls are painted as the victim no matter what terrible things happen to boys. And they also espouse the completely debunked idea of a wage gap. We will talk about dangerous jobs. We'll talk about the reason that men are more likely to get raises, and we'll talk about some of that other stuff at the end of the video. But just for now, just know 100% that the wage gap has been fully disproven. It is down to how women choose to work. It is down to whether women choose to have children and then leave the workforce. And there's such an intricate matrix of necessary roles for families to play in this kind of culture that I think people are missing altogether. I think that if you are to motivate boys and tell them that they need to be good husbands and fathers, that they would be much more likely to really want to go to school and to really want to have the kind of skills they need to earn a good amount of money for their family. But because we don't offer that pretty much worldwide, I think that there's a serious issue in whether boys are sufficiently motivated to continue school. But there's another factor that I also wanted to talk about. This is something that no one appears to take into account anymore. And this is the effect of fatherlessness on the American society. At the America First Policy Institute, I'm not familiar with them, but they do sound right-leaning. We are motivated by a simple truth: America's greatness relies on the strength of American families. A genuinely America First vision understands that families are at the very core of society. Stable families form stable communities, and stable communities create a stable nation. This is something that Confucius touched on, which is a quote that I read you guys a little while ago. Americans are united in the belief that strong families are a net positive for society. For example, according to a Rasmussen poll of 1,200 registered voters conducted on January 20th through 21st, 2022, 84% of those polled believe a strong family is foundational to a strong America and that parents should bear the primary responsibility for raising children. 100%. I completely agree. Only 11% say raising children is a community responsibility. Of those polled, 67% believe that the decline of the family is harmful to American growth and prosperity, and 65% think that children who grow up fatherless are at a significant disadvantage in life. Unfortunately, decades of political mismanagement, no matter how well the initial intentions, have exacerbated the problem. AFPI believes that we must judge all policies by results rather than intentions. Good for them. There is nothing compassionate about leaving entire communities mired in vicious cycles of poverty perpetuated by outdated and counterproductive government programs. The effects of broken families have been staggering. So let's look at this a little bit. Across America, there are approximately 18.3 million children who live without a father in the home, comprising about 1 in 4 U.S. children. This is from Father Absence Statistics. The United States has the highest rate of children living in single-parent households of any nation in the world, and they cite statistics from just last year. About 80% of single-parent homes are led by single mothers. This is from Single Mother Statistics 2021. At a rate of 23% of children living with one parent and no other adults, the United States stands over 3 times the world average of 7% of children raised by one parent. For reference, the number stands at 3% for China and 4% for India. Of all births in the U.S. today, about 41% of children are born to unwed mothers. For women under the age of 30, the demographic that bears 2/3 of children in general, the out-of-wedlock rate increases to 53%. While many unmarried women cohabitate with a partner at the time of giving birth, these relationships fail at twice the rate of marriages. Data suggests that more kids are likely growing up with a television in their bedroom than with both biological parents in the home. Oh my goodness, these are very sad statistics. But this is why I view fatherlessness as a serious issue for both boys and girls, but especially for boys who I'm opining here, but I firmly believe that boys need a male role model in the family to help them figure out their masculinity. I don't feel like that's crazy to say. I don't feel like it's closed-minded to say that either. I think it's just good common sense, and I hope that no one's arguing with that, but I suspect that the left has an issue with that, given how toxic they think masculinity is. Children from fatherless homes fare far worse in metrics of overall well-being and mental and behavioral health. These children are often burdened with lower self-esteem than other children, and they do not understand why their fathers abandoned them. This is so sad. This leads to a number of emotional problems like anxiety, social withdrawal, and depression, and it also leads to an increased risk of suicide and other forms of self-harm. Overall, children from single-parent families are twice as likely to suffer from mental health problems as those living with married parents. Research also suggests that high-risk children in single-parent homes have nearly 5 times a greater chance of developing mood disorders than those in dual-parent households, even when controlling for household income, age, and depression status of the parents. This research suggests that fatherlessness is a significant contributor to mental health issues in children, and you know that I will leave all of these links to these sites in the description of this video. This is kind of soul-crushing, and this is exactly what I expected, but I think this is probably a huge factor in why boys don't do well in school and generally don't do as well in life as the children of married parents or parents parents with relationships in which the father is present. That was a very complicated way of saying that. And I think I'm concerned about the fact that boys aren't doing well, not just because of school, which I blame partly on fatherlessness, but there is a really big reason that we need men. And you can call it kind of self-serving, but if you want a cohesive culture, if you want a country in which to run your cohesive culture, you're going to need a military. And Bloomberg here is reporting from September that the U.S. military is facing the biggest recruiting hurdle in 50 years. And I'm going to skip down to what I searched initially, if I can find it. Yeah. The Army is facing the most acute recruiting problems. The service will finish fiscal 2022 with about 466,000 active duty soldiers, 10,000 people below target, according to Lieutenant General Douglas Stitt, the Army's Deputy Chief of Staff for Personnel. The decline doesn't stop there. Service leaders project that active duty numbers will fall to between 445,000 and 452,000 by the end of fiscal 2023. That's down from the 473,000 active duty soldiers the Army projected in its budget request for the fiscal year starting October 1st. Our objective is to regrow our end strength to 460,000 or more as quickly as possible, and we'll pursue this objective aggressively, Stitt said in a prepared testimony. However, we will not sacrifice quality to meet end strength. That's good. In contrast, the Navy is likely to meet its active duty recruiting target, but it's falling short with recruiting into the reserves by 1,800 people out of a goal of 7,400. Officer recruitment is also facing trouble, according to Vice Admiral Richard Cheeseman, the Chief of Naval Personnel. Meanwhile, the Marine Corps is facing a significant enlisted recruiting challenges, but has been able to make up the gap by an exceptional retention year, said Michael Strobel, the Marine Corps Assistant Deputy Commandant for Manpower and Reserve Affairs. The Air Force will meet active duty required recruiting goals for this year by a narrow margin with a minimum bank of ready recruits for 2023. Lieutenant General Caroline Miller, the Deputy Chief of Staff for Manpower, said in prepared testimony the Air Force National Guard and Reserves are expected to miss 2022 recruiting goals by approximately 2,400 and 1,400 people, respectively, according to Miller. They don't really give us a summary here, but I'm fully prepared to blame this entirely on diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is something that the U.S. Department of Defense has highly prioritized. As you can see here from defense.gov, we see that diversity, equity, and inclusion are necessities in the U.S. military from Jim Garamone. And I'm going to stop right here because I trust that you guys are all familiar with diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings. And I want to emphasize the fact that by attempting to decolonize the armed forces, they are actively making it so that white men are less welcome. I personally have a huge issue with that because I am not a fan of ever giving someone a hard time over something that they cannot change. Like, I would never give someone a hard time for their height, their hair color, eye color, color of their skin. None of this stuff they can change, including gender. All of this stuff is unchanging, not their fault, nothing that they chose. But we know that the DIE curricula teaches white people that they ought to be ashamed. It's the most interestingly white supremacist learning system that I've ever seen because it essentially is teaching people that white people are superior at everything. They need to be held back. They need to feel guilty. But at the end of the day, they are better at everything, which is such a terrible thing to tell anyone. You should not be telling white people that. You should not be telling any kind of minority person that. You shouldn't be telling women that they're lesser than men, that men are superior to them. It's so interesting to me to watch the things the left says that they're fighting against just take a front and center stage for them when you look at issues like white supremacy. If you were to sit down with a person and ask them who is superior to another race, and they were to tell you that they thought that white people were supreme, what would you think they thought? Would you think they were into diversity, equity, and inclusion, or would just think that they were white nationalists? Because I would think the latter. I do not appreciate someone coming out and saying that white people are superior in any regard, and I think that's part of what's pushing the single largest demographic that's in the U.S. military out of the way, and I'm willing to bet that this is what is decreasing their recruitment. It's going to be a big problem for the U.S. moving forward. But they're fully serious about this. Like, they're fully invested. Like, the Army is going to change hair and grooming guidelines to promote equity, inclusion, and diversity. Oh my gosh, ridiculous. I couldn't wear earrings growing up playing basketball, let alone go into combat. Seriously. The U.S. Army is planning on changing their hair and grooming guidelines to allow women to wear long ponytails, buzz cuts, nail polish, earrings, lipstick, Hill reports. This is one way we're working to improve the lives of our soldiers, our force, by putting people first, understanding their concerns, taking action where necessary, and maintaining their razor-sharp edge of readiness. Equity, inclusion, and diversity are all very important to Army readiness. Okay, you may have noticed that the Army is one of those most significant shortfalls in recruitment, and I'm willing to bet that this is a part of the reason. There are a few things at play, to be fair. First of all, telling white men that you don't like them, that they're oppressors, they're terrible, they're evil. Who would dedicate their lives to working with an institution that tells them that constantly? Why would you? By nature of your identity, you're out. You are the oppressor. There's no role for you there. And second of all, I think that trying to get people to enroll, to recruit for a military in a country that you have been denigrating for decades is not going to work. And I think that the entirety of diversity, equity, and inclusion is just such a kick in the teeth to the military defense. And I genuinely feel like this is a World Economic Forum kind of one world government, global reset, whatever they talk about, kind of idea. We don't need borders. We don't need military. We just need everyone under one umbrella government that will look after all of us and that will prevent the need for any kind of war in the future. Live in the pod, eat the bugs, and don't worry about the military. Don't worry about borders or anything like that. That's what it feels like to me. It's not just a war on men. It's a war on borders. It's a war on individual countries, individual independence, and the family. I know that it gets overwhelming after a while, but I think when you start to look, one of the things that Melania, what's that girl? The new lady in Italy. I forget her last name. She mentioned that they are attacking the fundamental parts of human identity because they want to dislodge it and make people disjointed and atomized. And she's entirely correct. And this is one of the ways they do that, by making men and women dislike one another, view each other as oppressors and like opponents and enemies. And this is exactly what's been pushed through DIE. This is why boys are not going to... I don't blame any man for not wishing to put his life on the line for an institution that believes this, that tells him that he's evil. But I digress on that point. That's not the only issue that's pushing people out of the military. I'll just kind of brush over this because it's kind of just what I've been saying. The Air Force Academy's diversity and inclusion training is angering conservatives. Can't imagine why. Governor Noem and colleagues urge Congress to remove COVID-19 vaccine mandate for the military. I think this is probably another reason that young men aren't interested in joining the military, and I will point to exactly why young men would find this to be an unwise use of their youth and their time. This is why. Pericarditis is an inflammation of the outer lining of the hearts. Myocarditis and pericarditis have rarely been reported, blah, blah, blah. When reported, the cases have been especially in adolescents and young males within several days after the COVID-19 vaccination, which is Pfizer or Moderna. I am really, really glad that Andy never got the COVID vaccination because of this. This is a risk, especially for men, especially in this demographic. And the younger a man is, the more likely he is to be at risk for this. So I'm really grateful that it wasn't required for him. And I don't blame any young man who looks at this and says the cost is not worth the benefit to me. COVID is not threatening enough to me to cause this kind of an issue. I don't think it's worth being at risk for this kind of thing just so I can get the COVID vaccination. And I don't want to enlist if it means that I have to get vaccinated, if that then means that I might be stuck with myocarditis or cardiological issues throughout the rest of my life. All of this transpires to a kind of depressing picture, and I haven't even mentioned feminism, but that's what the last video that I'm going to show you guys is about, because somebody asked Cher if she thinks that men are important. And I trust all of you guys to completely understand why men are important and to also understand why women are important. But I think what Cher has to say is so indicative of a societal breakdown. This is the societal decay, societal rot, because she doesn't understand the role that men play in making her life possible. And I think one of the things that I've been noticing is that people in modern society don't seem to understand how violent and cruel and terrible human history has been up to this date. We don't realize how lucky we have it, how lucky we are. We don't realize how blessed we have been. The fact that I can sit in this lit room that's heated while it's raining outside. I have shoes on, I have clothing, I have glasses to wear, I have a computer that works. All of these things I'm incredibly grateful for are unique, especially to this time in history. A king would have not had a room this fancy in the past. Like, they wouldn't have been able to pick up the phone and order anything on DoorDash from anywhere in the city at any point in their existence. These are the fanciest people in the world at the time. They had all of the nicest things, but they didn't have a cell phone. They didn't have eyeglasses that made it easier for them to see. They didn't have clothes that fit the way my clothes fit. They didn't have jewelry. All of these things that people just take for granted left and right. It's a symptom of this ignorance of history that people are so unwilling to view men as an important part of our society. Without men, I would be cold. It would be dark in here. I wouldn't have running water. We wouldn't have indoor plumbing. We wouldn't have computers. We wouldn't have a refrigerator. All of these things, the roles that men play are so pivotal to the way that we are able to look at the world right here from atop our crown, our throne at the top of history, and say, oh, we don't need men. History wasn't really that bad. We'd be fine without them. All we need are women. We know how significant men are, and I respect that all of you guys appreciate that. Let's watch this video. It's really well done. I saw it in the past earlier, and I just wanted to drive home the significance of the role that men play in the world, and we'll kind of close with this. So let's see. She asked the question, do you think men are important? Let me see if I can get it to play. So that was a nice visual representation of some of the really dirty, really tough things that men do for our society as a whole. And these are things we should all be incredibly grateful, because these are things that men find really challenging, an adventure, something worthy of them. They understand that their strength, I'm speaking in general terms, work with me here, but I think that men understand that their strength has a purpose. And when they can find a career that puts them in a place where they're in tune with their physical strength and their desire for adventure and their drive to make the world a better place and earn some good money in the meantime. Because jobs like this are the reason that men make more money than women. Men are willing to work on an oil rig. Men are willing to crawl through fields toward the enemy. Like, this is something that society seriously needs. And when we don't value the roles that men play, we're going to be at a disadvantage. And we're seeing that already with the military. So the positive note that I'd like to leave you guys with is that if you have a man in your life, I hope that you are grateful for them. If you're a woman, I hope that you respect how different they are from you. And I hope that you appreciate how their nature is very much the yin and yang. The whole pattern that makes the world work is that women work with the relationships and men work by facing the enemy and making sure that women and children are protected and cared for. And it's because we have these differences in our character and these differences in our nature that we are just so perfectly in line to have a truly efficient, effective, wonderful world where kids are taken care of, where men and women are an optimal, kind of an optimal interchange with their partner. And I hope that you guys will recognize that the role that men play is just as important as the role that women play. And both of these strengths are necessary to make the world work properly. And I think that the emphasis that we've given to women, even in that first article we were reading that kept trying to take it back to how women are underserved without recognizing the fact that because school has been so feminized, boys can barely get anything out of it at this point. It's just such a symptom of the time that we're in, that we only focus on one gender. And I think that's such a weakness. And I hope that we can start working on that. And I would hope that today you will look at the men in your life and say, thank you for doing whatever it is you do. I appreciate that you're different from me. If you're a woman, or if you're another man, I'll say, thanks for all you do, bro. I appreciate you. I know you might think it's sappy, but it really is very important. And we do have to start from the ground up. There's no other way to kind of heal this cultural divide except by taking responsibility for it ourselves. And I hope that you guys will do that going forward. I will leave you with that thought for sure. Thank you all for joining me this evening. I had a great time. It's been kind of a shift from what I typically like to talk about, but I thought it was really important. So I hope you guys will get something out of it too. Thanks for sticking with me all this time. I know I went along today, and now I'm off to run some errands of my own. Hope you all will have a nice evening. Until next time, bye guys.